All right, good morning. You glad to be here today? I hope so. I hope so. Take out your Bibles, take out your outlines. We are in a series of messages called Top 10. And we decided to start the year kind of talking about a subject that everybody's familiar with at some level. So even if you're not a Jesus person, God person, whatever, you've heard of the Ten Commandments. You're familiar with them a little bit, right? If somebody were to come to you and say, hey, do you know anything about Ten Commandments? Can you give me one or two of them? You probably could. And so we decided to start this year walking through the Ten Commandments, kind of talking about what are they, what do they mean, what, do they apply, is it for us, and all that kind of stuff. So that's where we've been. Now, if you're new in the room, if this is your first time, we're super glad that you're here. Thanks for coming. But you're coming kind of in the middle of the movie, if you will, and you've missed a bunch. So here's my recommendation. I'm going to try to get you caught up today a little bit. But you're going to want to go onto our website if you're interested. Click the link that says sermons. Go to our YouTube page. You're going to want to watch some of the videos that led us to this point. Because here's where we've been and how we got to where we are. The Ten Commandments, it's the story of Moses found it. Tell me where it's found, everyone. Exodus chapter 20, okay? Good. Moses got the Ten Commandments. Many of you have seen the movie, the whole deal, right? And Ten Commandments and let my people go and Egypt and all that kind of stuff, right? So, but what we learned is, as we've kind of been dissecting this a little bit, that we call the Ten Commandments the moral code or the moral law. And that all the laws, there was actually 613 laws that God gave to Moses. And so, but these moral ones stand out. They were the first ones, and we call them the moral because they transcend Israel. They transcend into our culture and our society. It's a moral implication and a way in which we're supposed to live, right? You fast forward to Jesus' day. Remember the words of Jesus when he said, look, all the law and the prophets, when the guy came and said, look, what's the greatest commandment? Because by the time you get to Jesus, they had taken the 613 and turned it into the IRS tax code. I mean, it was like crazy amounts of rules and regulations and all this stuff. And the guy's like, which is the most important? And Jesus said, look, there are two. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then he said, all the law of the prophets, in other words, everything in the Old Testament, all the laws, all the Ten Commandments included, all of that boils down to these two things, he said. It's all about loving God and loving other people, right? So, as we've been dissecting this, we took the first four of the Ten Commandments. First four were all about interacting with God. How do we prioritize Him? How do we, honor Him and all that kind of stuff? That was the first four. And then the last six are all about giving us principles in which to govern how we are to behave with the people in our world that will help us to love them the way God said to love them, right? So that's what we've been talking about. And we said this, we said that the reason the love your neighbor as yourself thing is so important is because God gave humanity and Israel and us, if you're a Christian in the room, He has given us the job of representing Him to the world. In other words, how we behave will directly impact how people see God. And so it matters. It matters how you behave. It matters what you say, all these kind of things. So we've been kind of walking through this. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we've covered some really important ones. We started with, the ones that are all about us, right, and how we interact. It starts with the family. Honor your parents. We talked all about what that means, that God starts with the family unit and our understanding of authority and how we interact with authority, not just in the home, but in our culture and society in general, that it starts there. So God gives us some principles there about what it means to honor your parents. And last week, we talked about the most famous of all the Ten Commandments that most everybody could probably tell you. If they could only tell you one, they could tell you this one, and that is, thou shalt not murder, right? You don't murder. And so last week, we dissected that, and We looked at the words of Jesus as we are again today, that Jesus dove into that. And it's not just about not taking someone else's life, that the core issue, the heart issue that we had to deal with last week was anger. Because anger is what leads to murder. Anger is what leads to all that kind of behavior with the people in our world that is the opposite of loving them, right? So last week was all about murder. Well, today we dive into number 7. Number 7 is found at the top of your outline in Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. After murder, he says, you must not commit adultery. Now, I gave a little preface before we started, the little sign there, because today's topic, we're going to talk about adultery. We're going to talk about sex, okay? And so that's why it was kind of a PG-rated kind of thing and that deal. But number 7 on your outline is no adultery. No adultery. So I don't think I have to give you too much of a definition for you to understand what this is. We all kind of know what adultery is. Adultery is having sex with someone who is married. Either you're married or they're married or you're both married. But adultery specifically is about having sexual relations with somebody who is committed to someone else, who is in a covenant relationship with someone else. This does stand apart from in the New Testament, and we'll read some of the verses, but there's adultery, and then there's immorality, which is sex in general outside of marriage. So in particular, adultery is a sexual sin that breaks the covenant of marriage. So once again, in the Ten Commandments, we have God stepping in to protect the marriage, to protect the family unit. And as we said a couple weeks ago, it's because the family that God created, he created man and woman, brought them together, the two become one flesh, that it is through that union that our humanity is perpetuated, and we have children and all of those kind of things, that God created that as a sanctuary for each other, as something that was to be a covenant between a man and a woman, right, exclusively, and that within the bonds of that covenant come the offspring and how we flourish in our world, okay? So that's the reason. So God steps in to give us some parameters or some protections, if you will, to say, don't monkey with that. Don't mess with that. Now, you go back, and we won't spend a lot of time, but what's interesting, and I'll let you go back and read this, but when you go all through the Bible, I mean, it's all over the place, you'll find God's prohibition against sexual sin, in particular adultery, but other kinds. It's all over the place. And you go to the New Testament. Every time the Apostle Paul or the other writers of the New Testament, whenever they list kind of a list of sins that are paramount or a part of our flesh and that part of us that just wants to do whatever we want to do, that thing, those lists that are all bad, sexual sin is always part of it. It's always a part of that thing. It's just there, and it lumps it together. So this is a big deal. Look at this in Matthew chapter 15, verse 19. We said this last week, and I wanted to remind you that when Jesus talks about these things, he cuts to the chase. Here's what Jesus said in Matthew 15, 19, if you remember from last week. Jesus said, "For from the heart come evil thoughts." Okay? What he was addressing, remember? The Pharisees or the religious leaders were all about, washing your hands and all these ceremonies and all this kind of stuff. And they were all concerned because his disciples weren't washing their hands and doing all the kind of stuff, all the traditions that the religious people did to try to make sure they were clean. And Jesus said, look, it's not about how dirty your hands are. What the issue is, it's your heart. That what defiles you comes from your heart. It's not from your hands. It's a heart issue that Jesus was getting to. Okay? So here's what he says. For from the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, all sexual immorality, theft, lying, and slander. This is one of those lists that you'll find repeated throughout the New Testament. these lists of things that are bad. Sexual immorality, adultery, they're all part of this, okay? But Jesus' point here is that we're dealing with a heart issue. So now we go to Matthew 5 again. Like last week, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is talking, and he's talking to this Jewish crowd that knows all about the Ten Commandments and all of this, but Jesus, again, gets to the heart of the matter. Look what he says in Matthew 5, verse 27 and 28. He says, "You have heard the commandment that says you must not commit adultery. But I say," Jesus said, "anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart." So again, remember last week, Jesus said, you've heard it say, don't murder. But I tell you, anyone who's angry, anyone who has a heart issue with someone else has already committed murder. He does the same thing. He raises the bar. He says, listen, this isn't about the letter of the law. This is about your heart. This is about you understanding that if you're married and you look at another woman, if you're not married but she's married, and you look at another woman and you lust after her, you have already committed adultery in your heart, Jesus said. This is a heart issue. So the heart issue we're dealing with today is the issue of lust. Lust. Okay? And I'm going to help you try to understand what we're talking about today. And I'm going to be talking a lot to men, but not just to men, right? Because although studies have shown that lust is more of a problem for men than it generally is for women, that doesn't mean women can't fall subject to this particular temptation as well. This heart condition called lust. So today we're going to unpack this a little bit and understand what we're talking about. That the heart issue is lust. In 1 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul writes about this, and here's why this matters and why it matters in our culture. Because we live in a culture today, as Paul did then, that was very flippant, very dismissive, very permissive when it came to sexuality, when it came to, using your body for however you wanted, with whomever you wanted, and all of that. That was the culture in which he lived. That's the culture in which we live. And it's pervasive anywhere. And in fact, listen. The reason why this is such a thing for us is because there is a multi-billion-dollar industry that is designed to do nothing other than to cause you to lust. And I'm not talking about the porn industry. I'm talking about marketing, general marketing. That anyone in marketing will tell you that sex sells. And so to sell you a can of beer, to sell you lip balm, to sell you vacations, to sell you anything you can imagine, they wrap it up in models that are sexy and look good and all this kind of thing, because it's all meant for you to look at them, to lust after them and want to be them or want to be with them, and therefore I should drink this or I should wear this or I should have this, whatever. It's a whole industry built around this. It's built into our culture. So here's what you need to hear as we begin unpacking this. Is that there's nothing wrong, listen to me now, there's nothing wrong with looking at a beautiful woman or looking at a handsome man and admiring their beauty. Hey, that's a beautiful woman, that's a beautiful man. Lust is when your eyes linger and you start imagining things that you shouldn't. When your imagination starts to take their clothes off, when your imagination starts to wrap yourself in a relationship with them in some fashion, that's where lust comes in the picture. That's where red flags should be going off in your head. That's what we're talking about. Because here's the thing, and we're going to talk about this. there is a built-in, innate attraction to a person of the opposite sex. That's part of how God created us, right? It's natural. It's how we find the person we marry. It's how we have children, all of this. Sex is not bad. Sex is a good thing. Sexual attraction is a good thing when it is focused at the right individual. It's when we start broadening the scope and we start looking and imagining and dreaming and all these kind of things outside of the venue in which God created this, which is marriage. Now you might say, well, I'm not married. What am I supposed to do? Well, you need to be careful. You need to be careful. Because you don't want to act in any way that's going to compromise you for the person you're ultimately going to marry someday. And statistics say that most people get married, not everybody, and some people don't and live a long life not married and all that. I get it, but they're few and far between. Statistics say most people get married. And this conversation, I can't dive into sex and because inevitably when I have this conversation, especially with like teenagers, college students, you get the questions about, well, how far is too far, and all these kind of questions. And all I'm going to say about that is, if you were going to measure how far was too far, how far is, how far you want the person you're ultimately going to marry to have gone with their previous boyfriend or girlfriend. That's how far. Okay? How far do you want your future wife or your future husband to have gone with their previous relationship? That's how far. Okay? So, we're not going to get into that, but what I want you to understand is in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, look at what Paul says here. Paul says, run. Run from sexual sin. No other sin, look what he says, no other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. You see, what Paul does here is there's classifications of sin. There's all kinds of sin that we are going to talk about throughout this series. But he says when it comes to sexual sin, that is in a category all by itself. It's dangerous. It's harmful. It hurts your body. You might go, well, it doesn't hurt, whatever, and not harming anybody, and no harm, no foul, and it was consensual, and all these kind of things. No. What you don't understand is that God created us as sexual beings, okay? Listen, and I had this talk. You can go back on our website and watch when that series I did last year called Sex, Love, and Relationships. We talked all about what intimacy is. In a nutshell, intimacy is the goal, the oneness that we're talking about, and that emotional intimacy, a oneness of two people coming together, that sex was designed to be the ultimate culmination of that emotional oneness within the context of a covenant relationship. It's a giving of yourself to someone else, them giving themselves to you. You're committed for a lifelong relationship, and sex is meant to be the culmination of that oneness. But when we turn around and we just give it to that one, and 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 give it to... that our ability to be intimate with someone else, truly intimate with someone else, erodes. It erodes. That's how it harms you emotionally and physically. We could talk about STDs and all that kind of stuff. Imagine for just a minute. Imagine if our world, just say our culture, let's just take our country, our culture. If we just obeyed this single command and we stopped cheating on our spouses and stopped having sex with people outside of the marriage that, our covenant and their covenant, whatever, can you even imagine how that would change our society? Venereal diseases, STDs would practically disappear. The parental situations, because adultery has broken up so many marriages, divorces rates would plummet. Children would have both parents in the home as they're supposed to. I mean, think about just this one command. In Proverbs chapter 6, verse 32, you can look it up. But the writer of Proverbs tells us that the adulterer is a fool. He's a fool. Because adultery destroys the soul. He's destroying himself, he says. So, how do we fight lust? I want to just give you a few practical things here today. How do we fight lust? The first one, number one, on your outline is be loyal. Be loyal. Loyalty is a word that we use in various contexts and settings, but here's the deal. Loyalty is the opposite of adultery. See, adultery is the ultimate act of disloyalty. That when I commit myself in marriage, I'm in a covenant commitment. When I choose to go outside that commitment and covenant, I am being disloyal to the person that I swore to be with the rest of my life. And we need to just learn how to be loyal. The word loyalty brings to mind a powerful sense of belonging and solidarity, coupled with unswerving devotion and duty. That's loyalty. Loyalty says that I'm going to do some things that are going to stand in the way of me being disloyal. That I'm going to take steps. I'm going to put guards around me to protect my marriage, to protect the sanctity of the marriage bed and what that means. That I'm not going to allow myself to be in situations that could lead me somewhere. We need to be loyal. Look at this, Proverbs chapter 5, verses 15 to 18. The writer of Proverbs says this, drink water from your own well. Share your love only with your wife. Why spill the water of your springs in the streets, having sex with just anyone? You should reserve it for yourselves. Never share it with strangers. Let your wife be a fountain of blessing for you. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. What this means is we have to be careful. We have to take steps. How do we show loyalty? Let me just give you a couple things. Number one, you could write this on the side, but being loyal means prioritizing your marriage. See, most couples, and I've done a lot of marriage counseling, and couples that sit in, couples that are going through adultery, and all these kind of things. And what I always find, and what I always reiterate with them is, listen, ultimately what leads people to this is they take their marriage for granted. A good marriage takes hard work. Good relationship takes hard work. It's not automatic. You don't say I do and then you just go about your merry way and everything's just going to be hunky-dory. You got to pay attention. We got to pay attention. Prioritize our marriage. Make sure your spouse, your husband, your wife knows that they matter to you. And you do that by spending time with them, by talking with them, by, whatever. And again, go back and watch some of the marriage series that I've done that communicates value. But we have to prioritize our marriage. That means prioritizing it over job opportunities, prioritizing it over children's activities. You see, sometimes we get so caught up in running with the kids, run with the kids, that we are hurting our marriage while we're loving our children. And the marriage has to come first. You should never have anything in your world that is causing you and your spouse to do this. Prioritize your marriage. Here's an easy one. It's not easy, but it's an effective tool, if you will. And I'm going to talk to guys, but this applies to girls too. Guys, if you find your eyes lingering on someone, in particular, your eyes drift from this part of the body to this part of the body of someone who is not your spouse, right? If you find that happening, you need to do what's called bounce your eyes away. Okay, I see that good-looking person, but I'm gonna look somewhere else right now. I'm gonna prevent myself from lingering while I'm looking at someone. I'm gonna bounce my eyes. When you find yourself, whoa, okay, you know how that goes, right? Somebody walks by, beautiful woman, a nice-looking guy, whatever, and they walk by, and it's like, right? And you do that, then you need to look away. You need to bounce. If something caught your attention and you find yourself lingering, bounce your eyes. Respect your spouse enough. Be loyal to him or her enough to not dwell and stare, and you know what I'm talking about. Bounce your eyes. And the third thing, to be loyal, listen, married couples, now I'm only talking to married couples right now. Here's how you are loyal to each other. Have sex with each other. I know that goes without saying sometimes, but you'd be surprised at how many married couples that I've met and interacted with and counseled with who don't. And it causes a problem. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, listen what Paul says. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 2 through 5, here's what he says. He said, but because there is so much sexual immorality, he was dealing with a church. It was all over the place, as it is in our world. Each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. The husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. The wife gives authority over her body to her husband, and the husband gives authority over his body to the wife. Do not deprive each other of sexual relations. And the only exception he gives is unless you both agree to refrain for a limited time so that you can give yourselves more completely to prayer. Okay, so ladies or men, if your wife is looking for it or you're looking for it and you're not in the mood, you've got one excuse. I'm fasting and praying. Okay. But headaches don't work. You've got to fulfill your spouse's needs. And the reason we even had that conversation a year ago and we spent so much time talking about intimacy, here's the deal. Husbands and wives, you've got to figure this out. Okay? If you are not being intimate with your spouse, there's a problem. You need to figure out what the intimacy problem is so that you can come back together. Because the temptation for adultery, the temptation for lust, always comes out of that void, if you will. Because it is natural. And wives and husbands need to understand that when it comes to marriage, God designed you to fulfill the desires for each of you to prevent this kind of lust and all this stuff happening. So your husband is the only place he has legitimately to go to fulfill this innate physical need is you. And the same thing for him. You guys have got to make this a priority. It's a real deal, all right? So we've got to be loyal. And number two goes right along with it. We have to be wise. We have to be wise. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22, Timothy, reiterating what Paul said earlier, he says, run. Paul is talking to Timothy now, and he says, run from anything that stimulates youthful lusts. Instead, pursue righteous living, faithfulness, love, and peace. Run from anything that stimulates youthful lust. Here's the deal. Listen. This is about setting up guardrails. This is about you putting things in place that will prevent you from stepping over the line. In other words, if this line right here is adultery, and you don't want to step into adultery and have an illicit affair with somebody else, and this is that line, you don't want to stand on this line. You want to create a series of barriers that keep you far away from that line. You want to create another line here. A line that if you crossed, you're still not there. Let me give you an example from just for me. You know, I'm a pastor. I meet with people all the time. But I have committed with my wife, and for myself, she didn't even ask me to do this. I did this. That I have set rules in place for me. Lines way back on the edge. Things like, I will never ride in a car with a woman of the opposite sex without my wife or without other people there. I'll never ride in a car with someone of the opposite sex by myself. I just won't. Does that mean we have to drive separately? Yes. I just don't do it. Does that mean if I do, somehow I'm violating? It's a line that I have drawn far enough back that I protect my marriage and protect myself. Right? I don't go to dinner or breakfast or in any even in a public setting out in the world with someone who is not my wife of the opposite sex. I just don't do it. Right? Does that mean if I did, it's wrong? No. These are lines I drew to keep me as far away as I could. And you need to do the same. You need to have guardrails, right? You need to make sure that there's nothing. Here's what I have found, and through reading and research and counseling and all that kind of stuff. Affairs generally happen with those kind of interactions. Affairs usually happen when a disgruntled spouse starts sharing their hardships with a coworker of the opposite sex who has an attentive ear and is, oh, you're so right, he's such a jerk. Oh, you're so right, she's such a jerk. I would never treat you that way. All of that kind of stuff. And it starts out real innocent and real simple and real, oh, whatever, we're just friends, we're just friends, we're just friends. Oh, we're not just friends anymore. That's how it happens. And we have to run from anything that could lead us in that direction. Oh, Pastor, you don't know. It's nothing. It's no big deal. It's innocent. It's fun. Nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen until it does. But as Jesus said, this isn't just about the physical act. I have counseled numerous couples where there was no act of sex, but there was a whole lot of emotional adultery going on. And Jesus said that's the same thing. We have to put guardrails in place. And I'll lead you with this. I've preached on this before, but if you have your Bibles, you want to go with me to Proverbs chapter 7. Proverbs chapter 7 is one of those moments we've talked about. The writer of Proverbs, kind of the voice of wisdom, if you will. There's a number of different voices that kind of speak through the book of Proverbs. Here, wisdom is pictured as an old man, a wise old man who's kind of watching out his window and watching this young, naive, foolish young man and where he's going and what he's doing. You're going to go read this passage. I'm not going to read all of it to you. But in verse 6, he starts and he says this, while I was at the window of my house, this is wisdom now, the old man wisdom. While I was at the window of my house looking through the curtain, I saw some naive young men, and one in particular who lacked common sense. He was crossing the street near the house of an immoral woman. She's married, by the way, we find out later. He was crossing near the house of an immoral woman, strolling down the path by her house. It was at twilight in the evening as deep darkness fell, and the woman approached him, seductively dressed and sly of heart. And it goes on to talk about how she entices him. And he thinks he's on this great night out, and ooh, there's this beautiful woman, and I'm going to go have the night of my life, and all this kind of stuff. But the writer here, wisdom, is crying out to him. And if you fast forward now, he says this, Verse 21, so she seduced him with her pretty speech and enticed him with her flattery. Verse 22, he followed her at once like an ox going to the slaughter. He was like a stag caught in a trap, awaiting the arrow that would pierce its heart. He was like a bird flying into a snare, little knowing, listen to this, little knowing it would cost him his life. You go, he was just going to go have a good time. The husband's out of town. What's the big deal? It's just a physical act between two people. No, 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 no. His life was at stake. He didn't know it. He thought, like most of us, hey, he's just going to go have a good time. No harm, no foul. It's consensual, whatever, yada, yada, yada. That's what our culture says. That's a conquest. That's a great thing to do. The writer of Proverbs says, no, no, no. He goes on, he finishes this way. So listen to me, my sons, and pay attention to my words. Don't let your hearts stray away toward her. Don't wander down her wayward path. For she has been the ruin of many, many men have been her victims. Her house is the road to the grave. Her bedroom is the den of death. You see, I've preached on this before. It's the principle of the path. The principle of the path says this. Our decisions are steps on a path, not isolated events. We have to understand that to be true. Our steps, our decisions are steps. Go to that slide, would you, Luke? Our decisions are steps on a path, not isolated events. That every decision you make at work, every decision you make at home or whatever, distancing yourself from your spouse, getting too close to a coworker, whatever the case may be, these are all steps that lead to somewhere. They're not just isolated events. And we have to understand that when lust grabs a hold of us, when lust and the temptation to lust presents itself, we need to run away. We need to set up boundaries and guardrails that keep us far away. Because it's all too easy for us to get close enough, baby step at a time, and step over and ruin a marriage and ruin a home and ruin children's lives. And I mean, I've seen the devastation. And all of it started way back here. Like I said the other week, no one ever gets up and goes one day, hey, you know what? I think I got a great idea. I think I'm going to cheat on my spouse today. No one ever does that. That all comes about with little baby steps in a direction. And it's about time we start looking at the baby steps we've been taking. Do you have the guardrails in place to keep as far away as you possibly can? I hope so. Let's bow our heads and close our eyes. Lust. It's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing for us to deal with, to recognize sometimes. Sometimes we just blow it off, no big deal. Everyone's doing it, whatever. But those steps are leading you to somewhere you don't want to go. Just like that young man in Proverbs chapter 7. Be loyal. Be wise. Because this culture and society around you wants to tear you down and destroy your marriage, destroy your future. Don't let them. If you're here today, you say, Pastor Mick, you know what? You hit home a little bit today, and I'd like you to pray for me. All heads bowed and all eyes closed. Nobody's looking around. This is private, please. If you're here today, you say, you know what, Mick, I need you to pray for me. Will you pray for me today? Pray for me. You raise your hand. I need prayer today, Pastor. Raise my hand. It's a tough one. I see those hands. I see those hands. Anybody else? Pastor, pray for me. I need prayer in this area. I've not been guarding myself, my marriage. I see those hands. You can put those down. Anybody else? Pray for me, Pastor. Take the steps, guys. Honor your spouse. Honor the commitment, the covenant that you've made. It's important. Father God in heaven, we love you today. We thank you for who you are. God, I pray for those who lifted their hands today and those who couldn't for whatever reason, but they're feeling it and you're speaking to their hearts. I pray that we all would make decisions to set up the guardrails, to protect against lust and the path that it leads to. Help us, God. Give us strength to recognize it, to honor, to be loyal, to be wise. We give you the praise in Jesus' name. Amen.